Another day, another unfortunate tale of a woman scammed by a relationship coach. Are we surprised at this point? Let this be a note that I will no longer be conducting interviews on this channel, and instead I will only be reading out scam stories. So if you have an experience that you want to potentially have shared out here on the channel, the form where you can submit it is linked down below. Without further ado, let's go ahead and jump right in. I have been hesitant to write this for a long time because of the abuse and the emotional harm that I endured working with a so-called professional relationship and dating coach. A few years ago, I hired this person thinking that they were going to help me uncover what it was that was holding me back from finding a relationship. I was vulnerable and insecure. I had searched for a number of coaches before I landed on his YouTube page. I booked a discovery call with him to talk about my challenges, and he seemed to believe that he could help me. They always think they can help. Sorry. Okay. I will not pass judgment before I read the story. I will not pass judgment before I read the story. I remember him telling me at the time that my problem was simple but not easy. And if I was prepared to do the work and commit financially, that I would easily find a way into a loving, happy relationship. Wait. Something's not adding up. I was shocked at the price tag of his services, which came to $1,800 a month with a year-long commitment. Let's just pop the math up on the screen for those of you at home. At the time, I was just out of graduate school and starting my career. I had some money set aside for my PhD, but I wanted so badly to be in a relationship in my vulnerable state that I made the decision to use the money to pay for his relationship coaching program. Looking back, he employed high-pressure sales tactics to get me to sign up. Okay, $21,000 a year, whether you're a new grad or you have a full-time job, is a lot of fucking money. I don't care who you are, but $20,000 a year for a relationship coach, and this isn't a judgment on the person that submitted this story. I'm just more so making an overall statement, not to downplay the experience, but like, I think objectively, even if you were making, $100,000, $200,000, $300,000 a year, dropping $20,000 for a coach is quite a bit of money, even if you can afford it. At the time, I was under the impression that he was going to provide targeted guided feedback and actionable steps for me to pursue my goals. From the first day of the program, I was somewhat surprised and disappointed. What his coaching consisted of essentially was him copying and pasting the exact same paragraph onto a Facebook page week after week. What were our dating breakthroughs, questions, and challenges with actionable steps? This was our assignment every week, the same exact paragraph. To me, that felt like I was more or less doing my own coaching. After a while, I felt unable to answer these same questions, and week after week, I became more and more frustrated. Why were there not new topics to explore? Okay, so just so I'm getting this correct, you were all funneled into a Facebook group, and then he would make a post once a week asking you the same handful of questions, and then you were just supposed to like publicly answer, and that was considered the coaching? This is weird. When I would express my frustrations to him, he would gaslight me by saying I needed to do a gratitude practice. He would have me do a gratitude practice every morning. All I needed to do was gratitude practice and dance every morning, and everything would fall into place. I committed to that practice for months, and needless to say, it didn't generate any of the results I was hoping for. I would see him do the same thing to many of the women, some of whom were suffering from severe depression, and they needed help from a licensed professional. The hurt and shame on their faces while he abused and manipulated them haunts me until this day. Okay, unfortunately, this is an all too common experience. If you are not new to my channel, you have likely heard many examples of this in the past, but if you are new here, oftentimes an experience we witness, allegedly in my opinion, in the coaching industry is too many coaches operating outside of an appropriate scope of practice, meaning that they don't really understand, I think, what it is they can or should be helping people deal with, and rather like to play sort of this game of pseudo therapy where they almost like delusionally convince themselves that they're qualified to help people with real mental health problems. And in my opinion, the result of that kind of behavior often ends up in detrimental impacts on the client themselves, where they end up in an even worse off position than they were in before they sought out the help from the coach. And so while Yes, I do believe there is a time and place for a coaching relationship. When it comes to mental health specifically, I will die on the hill that you should be going to a licensed, properly trained professional. And yeah, it might take you trying out a few therapists before you find one that's a right fit. But I will always advocate for that over, Jane Doe who decided to do her online life coaching certification last weekend. Anyways, I digress. In addition to feeling unsupported during the coaching, there were numerous other issues. I can remember a few times during the group calls that he skipped me when it was my turn for coaching. I had asked him for additional group sessions after the year was up since I was skipped over and he never got back to me. One month, his company double charged me and my account went into overdraft. To his credit, he got back to me right away when it happened and he refunded me, but he did not compensate me for the overdraft fees. It negatively impacted my credit as well. I had also asked him to review my profile and dating photos, and he never got back to me. Oh my God. Whenever I would ask him in the calls for specific targeted guidance, he would interrupt me and ask me to raise my hand and think of 5 things I was grateful for. What is this guy's obsession with gratitude? I don't understand. This was a way for him to distract me while he could avoid answering my questions because I eventually realized that he didn't actually know how to help me. Other women during the call would talk to him about nutrition or other unrelated topics, but he would never answer their questions about dating. He also made a number of inappropriate comments about my body, including my breasts, that would make me feel very uncomfortable. Okay, first of all, ew, so sorry that that happened to you. That's horrible. This practitioner that you're paying money to is basically harassing you. I hate that. But second of all, I think that this is a proper example of what I was just talking about these coaches not understanding their scope of practice, or in this case, not even understanding what their expertise is, and then offering people advice on things that aren't even related to what their expertise is supposed to be, because they don't actually have that level of expertise. Like, it is truly the Wild West out here, and I'm getting so sick of it. I don't remember what happened during that last call that I attended. All I remember feeling is that I didn't like the way the interaction went with him and myself. I remember taking a long walk after that call, as I often did when I was working with him, and feeling awful. I can remember I wanted to digest what he had told me and see how it landed, thinking maybe it was a form of tough love and that it would do me some good. But I also remember my intuition at the time telling me that something wasn't quite right and that maybe I should skip the call the following week and see how I would feel. It certainly wasn't the first time I felt uncomfortable after a call with him, but I decided that it would be the last. I decided to skip the call the next week. I made a decision then that if it felt like I needed to continue the group calls and the coaching after skipping a week, I would do it. If I didn't, I would pause another week and see how I feel. So that's what I did. This particular part I actually find quite admirable because I know, speaking from my own experience, when we are in sort of these like coaching bubbles, for lack of a better term, it can be really hard to, I think, allow ourselves that time to kind of step back and analyze what's going on. Like, if I think about my own coaching experience and some of the red flags that popped up that I've talked about on the channel, but also other ones that I haven't really bothered mentioning before, when I was in those spaces, in those communities, in those groups with other people, even if the coach were to, say something that kind of felt off or wasn't really sitting right with me, I don't know that I would necessarily put a pause on things. I would kind of just like brush it off and be like, well, if no one else is saying anything, it must just be my interpretation and maybe I'm the one in the wrong. So I really just want to acknowledge and admire the fact that you had the wherewithal to recognize that, like, hey, this guy is making me feel weird and I'm not sure what it is, but I'm going to allow myself the time to pause and reflect and think about it, because I think that that level of discernment is something that can often get lost when you are in these coaching relationships where you've invested a lot of time, invested a lot of money, and really are desperate to get the results that you're looking for. So kudos to you for at least having that sort of foresight. I didn't like to skip calls because of the high cost of the program, but I do remember that first week I felt much better. So I decided to skip the following week. I felt much lighter and freer. After about 2 months of skipping calls, he only reached out to me once and briefly. I was still continuing to pay him at the time. Finally, I decided I didn't want his services any longer and decided to stop paying him. It had been several weeks of me skipping calls and I was feeling like I was better off for it. He didn't get back to me until it was time to be paid, and lo and behold, he was very angry. Suddenly, after 2 months of me being away from the calls, he wanted to know how I was doing and why I wasn't on the calls. He texted me nonstop that morning when I was busy with work, and I felt like I was being harassed. He reminded me of his commitment to my growth and how disappointed he was in my lack of, and so on. But it honestly felt more like that he was disappointed he was no longer being paid. I felt like I was being bullied, so I wrote to him that I was disappointed as well and that the results of his program just fell short of my expectations and I would no longer be working with him. After that, I blocked him. I called my credit card company and my bank. I told them do not accept the charges anymore, and they flagged it as a fraudulent charge. I was done after that. There is something to be said, I think, about how transactional a lot of these relationships can be, especially in these instances where the client no longer wants to continue service. It seems to me that a lot of times, based on the stories I've been told, that many of these coaches really don't seem to care until there's a threat of, the money being taken away. And listen, I can understand from a business perspective how frustrating it would be if a client wanted to end service and they didn't verbally tell me that and they just stopped paying me. And depending on whether or not you signed a contract, there are sort of legal implications that could come up or arise as a result of that. However, I think just in this particular circumstance, it's interesting to me that this client is paying you, but they're not showing up to calls and you aren't really concerned and aren't really saying anything until they decide to cut off payment. And then all of a sudden, they're supposed to believe that you care so deeply about them and their success. There's something so disingenuous about that where it really feels totally transactional at that point when you only care once your own income is on the line. And prior to that, you didn't really give a crap whether or not they were getting what they paid for. So it's always just interesting to me. And again, this isn't unique to this story. This is something we see time and time again on the channel. I just think that money can make people do such weird things, and it's so baffling to me. By the way, no one in the group of 10 to 15 women that I worked in was dating anyone by the end of the program except 2. Okay, so out of 10 to 15 people, only 2 people found a relationship. One woman did meet her husband in the program. The other woman was already in a relationship when she joined the program. Everyone else was single by the end of the program. Many of them I am still in touch with and years later are still single. The work that he does, by the way, is essentially directly from Tony Robbins' coaching material that he has rebranded as a Finding Love coaching program. I guess I would be curious to know if this coach has any other certifications or training that they did, or they literally just went to a Tony Robbins event, fell in love with Tony Robbins, and then built a program around his teachings. Because it wouldn't be the first time, let me tell you that. After this was all over, I had to go to therapy for a long time. I've had to come to terms with the fact that I was scammed. After 6 years, I am now again raising money to be able to invest in a PhD, but the money I lost doesn't even come close to the emotional harm and violation that I experienced from him, which I still haven't recovered from. I felt violated, I felt confused, I felt manipulated, I felt abused. But I have learned a valuable lesson, and I hope that my story will prevent someone from making the same mistake that I did. I think what strikes me the most about this experience, and it's something that I feel like I say in every single one of these videos, is that experiences such as this one really highlight the lack of regulation, the lack of education, really just the lack of so many things, honestly, that many, many coaches fail to recognize. They just show up, they think,
hey, I can help anyone with anything because I did this thing and now I'm going to charge thousands of dollars.
And it's so frustrating to watch and to listen to time and time again. I want to send sincere thank you to the person that submitted this story. I'm glad to hear that you have been going to therapy and that things are starting to look up, but I can only imagine the position you would have been in at the end of that coaching relationship. And I think that that's something that's not really talked about enough because there is so much shame associated, I think, with these faulty investments that we make. Investments, I use that word very lightly in this context. But I think so many of us, and I'll speak from my own experience as an example, I think we're so embarrassed to admit the fact that hey, I spent thousands and thousands of dollars on literally nothing. And I feel so stupid to admit that. But the reality is when we find ourselves in these vulnerable positions, much like you stated at the beginning of your story, you're desperate to find someone to help you learn how to foster a healthy relationship, find a good partner, you're obviously going to be much more susceptible to believe this man that comes along and says hey,
I'm an expert in this. I can help you solve that problem.
And so that sort of opportunist behavior combined with, the high pressure sales call that he got you on where he was likely,
buy now or or this opportunity is going to slip away from you.
It's very, very easy to fall prey to this type of behavior. And so, my hope here, really, with sharing stories like this one, is not only to serve as a cautionary tale, but hopefully also to serve as a reminder for people who are considering, finding a coach of any sort to really be careful when it comes to, looking into their credentials, looking into their qualifications, and really just remembering that, like, the role of a coach in general shouldn't be to, like, help solve all your problems so much as just, like, help guide you based on what you already know to wherever you're trying to get to next. I mean, I have a whole video that breaks down, therapy, coaching, what is the role of a coach, that kind of thing. So if you haven't watched that video, I would recommend you go and do so. But if there is one thing that I want everyone to take away from this story, it's like, trust your gut. If you're feeling skeptical or like something is off, chances are you're probably right. Don't let the groupthink get to you. Practice discernment and do not join the coaches pyramid. Okay. Thank you so much for being here. Again, if you have a story you want me to read out here on the channel, the form where you can submit it is linked down below. I want to give a big shout out to our channel members. That includes the millionaire VIPs as well as my rich friends in the billionaire tier. Thank you so much for being here. I want to leave you on screen here with the story of a woman who lost $20,000 to a business coaching scam. Okay? Okay, I'll see you in my next video. Bye.